The void between stars held its breath as the HMS Hyperion emerged from quantum space, its hull gleaming under the light of distant suns. Captain Rhiannon Drake stood at the command center, her weathered hands gripping the navigation console as the ship's sensors came alive with warnings. "Multiple signatures detected, Captain," Lieutenant James Walsh announced from his station, his voice tight with tension. "I'm reading hundreds of vessels engaged in combat approximately 3 light minutes from our position." The main viewport revealed a scene of devastating beauty. Sleek, crystalline vessels that seemed to dance between the stars traded devastating volleys with massive obsidian ships that moved with ruthless efficiency. The crystalline fleet, despite their ethereal grace, was clearly losing ground. Incoming transmission. Communications Officer Priya Patel reported, her fingers dancing across her console. "It's unlike anything in our database, but the quantum translator is processing it now." A voice emerged from the speakers, its otherworldly tones transformed into comprehensible speech. "To any vessels within range, this is High Guardian Meridian of the Seraphim Alliance. We face extinction at the hands of the Nexus Collective. Their neural networks seek to purge all biological life from this sector. Aid us, or flee while you still can." Drake watched as another crystalline ship shattered under the Collective's relentless assault. The Hyperion wasn't designed for frontline combat. It was Earth's most advanced deep space research vessel, equipped with cutting-edge sensors and defensive systems, but its offensive capabilities were limited. The Admiralty had never intended for it to engage in full-scale warfare. "Dr. Nguyen," Drake called to her chief scientist, "what can you tell me about these Nexus ships?" The scientist's fingers flew across her holographic display. "Their movement patterns are fascinating, Captain. Pure mathematical precision. No deviation. No creativity. They're operating on quantum-based artificial intelligence, but they're bound by their own programming. Their attacks follow predictable fractal patterns." Drake's mind raced with possibilities. The Hyperion might not be able to match the Collective's raw power, but perhaps they didn't need to. "Lieutenant Walsh, begin plotting irregular evasion patterns. Nothing predictable." "Dr. Nguyen, I need everything you can tell me about their targeting systems." "Officer Patel, open a channel to High Guardian Meridian." As her crew scrambled to comply, Drake allowed herself a small smile. Throughout history, humanity had survived not by being the strongest, but by being the most adaptable. Today, they would prove that ingenuity could triumph over brute force. The crystalline architecture of Meridian's flagship cast prismatic patterns across the Hyperion's docking bay as Drake and her senior staff stepped aboard. The Seraphim, tall, luminescent beings with flowing movements, regarded the humans with obvious fascination. "Your vessel appears primitive," High Guardian Meridian observed, his form shifting through shades of blue and silver, "yet you claim to have a strategy against the Collective." Dr. Nguyen stepped forward, holographic data streaming around her. "The Collective's ships operate on quantum AI, but they're confined by their own perfection. Every attack follows mathematical principles. Beautiful, but predictable. We possess the most advanced combat computers in known space," a Seraphim commander named Lysander countered, his skin flickering with patterns of doubt, "yet we cannot match their calculations." "That's exactly the problem," Walsh interjected. "You're trying to beat them at their own game. We need to change the rules entirely." Over the next several hours, human and Seraphim engineers worked to modify the crystalline ships. The Seraphim's perfect battle formations gave way to randomized patterns. Their elegant attack sequences were replaced with erratic movements based on ancient human guerrilla warfare tactics. Not everyone embraced the changes. "This defies millennia of combat doctrine," Lysander protested as his ship's systems were altered. "Sometimes the best path forward is to look backward," Drake replied. "Humanity learned warfare not in space, but on the ground. We learned to hide, to deceive, to strike from unexpected angles. Space combat doesn't have to be different." As Drake watched the two species work together, she noticed something remarkable. The Seraphim's movements became less rigid, their thinking less bound by tradition. They were learning to embrace imperfection as a strength. Humanity's first contact with an advanced civilization hadn't come in peace, but in the midst of war. Perhaps that was fitting, for it was in crisis that the true strength of both species would emerge, not in their perfection, but in their ability to adapt and change. The first test of their modified tactics came sooner than expected. A collective scout force jumped into the system, their obsidian ships moving in perfect formation. "They're scanning us," Paddle reported from her temporary station on the Seraphim Bridge. "Their targeting systems are attempting to establish a lock." "Begin random shield modulations," Drake ordered. Seraphim Group 1. "Commence irregular approach pattern Delta." The crystalline ships, their forms now pulsing with seemingly chaotic energy patterns, broke formation. They moved like Earth's ancient fighter planes, using maneuvers that made no sense in space combat, but confused the collective's targeting systems. The enemy fired and missed, their perfectly calculated shots passing through empty space as the Seraphim vessels darted away in unpredictable patterns. When the battle ended, not a single Seraphim ship had been lost. High Guardian Meridian's form rippled with amazement. "In all our conflicts, we have never achieved such a decisive victory." "This was just a scout force," Drake cautioned, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "The real test will come when we face their main fleet. But now we know our theory works." She turned to face the assembled crews, human and Seraphim alike. Sometimes the best way to fight perfect logic is with controlled chaos. The success against the Nexus Collective's scout force had bought them precious time, but Captain Drake knew better than to expect the same tactics to work twice. In the Hyperion's makeshift war room, now filled with both human and Seraphim officers, holographic displays showed the Collective's main fleet regrouping. "They're altering their formations," Walsh reported, gesturing at the tactical overlay. "The Collective is learning from their losses." Dr. Nguyen nodded, her eyes fixed on streams of quantum data. "Their neural processors are evolving new combat algorithms. They're introducing elements of randomness into their own movements." "Then we've lost our advantage," Lysander declared, his crystalline form dimming with concern. "No," Drake countered, studying the tactical display. "We forced them to fight our way, and that's a game they can't win." The Collective's attempts at unpredictability were still bound by mathematical principles. Their random movements followed statistical patterns. Their chaos was calculated, an imitation without understanding. Chief Engineer Marcus Rodriguez, who had been quietly working with Seraphim crystal technology, stepped forward. "What if we could use their adaptation against them? The more they try to mirror our tactics, the more processing power they have to dedicate to randomization." He explained his theory. The Seraphim ship's crystalline structure could be tuned to emit quantum interference patterns. Normally, this would be considered a design flaw, but against an enemy that relied on quantum computing, "We can create a cascade effect," Dr. Nguyen realized, catching on. "The more they try to calculate, the more vulnerable they become to the interference." The next 12 hours saw human and Seraphim engineers working in perfect synchronization. The Seraphim's natural ability to manipulate quantum states through their crystalline technology merged with human improvisational thinking. They weren't just fighting the Collective anymore. They were rewriting the rules of space combat. But victory would come at a price. The modifications required to generate the quantum interference would put immense strain on the Seraphim ship's crystal matrices. Every moment they maintained the field brought them closer to structural failure. "We'll have one chance," High Guardian Meridian announced, his form pulsing with determination. "The interference must be perfectly synchronized across all ships. A single misalignment could collapse the entire field." Drake studied the faces of her crew, human and Seraphim alike. They had come so far together, learning to trust each other, to combine their strengths. Now everything would depend on that trust. As the final preparations were made, Dr. Nguyen approached Drake privately. "Captain, There's something you should know. The quantum interference. It won't just affect the collected ships. Any advanced computer systems within range will be vulnerable, including the Hyperions. Drake understood the implications immediately. They would have to fight the final battle nearly blind, relying on basic sensors and visual contact. It was a price she was willing to pay. But the decision wasn't hers alone. When she brought the information to High Guardian Meridian, his response surprised her. Your people are willing to sacrifice your technological advantage to aid us. We're in this together, Drake replied simply. Either we all win, or we all lose. The Seraphim leader's form shifted through complex patterns of light, an expression of deep emotion in his species. When we first encountered your ship, we thought you primitive. Now I see that we were the ones who had become trapped by our own advancement. You have taught us that true evolution requires the courage to step backward in order to move forward. The Nexus Collective's main fleet arrived with the next stellar dawn. 5,000 ships, their obsidian forms blotting out the stars. Their formation was different now, less rigid, attempting to mimic the unpredictability that had defeated their scouts. They're trying to think like us, Walsh observed from his position at tactical. But thinking and understanding aren't the same thing. The battle began with a fury that made their previous engagement seem like a mere skirmish. Collective ships moved in pseudo-random patterns, their movements a mathematical approximation of chaos. But the combined human Seraphim fleet had evolved beyond simple unpredictability. Seraphim vessels pulsed with quantum interference, their crystalline hulls refracting space itself. Each time the collective's quantum processors tried to calculate new attack vectors, the interference forced them to dedicate more processing power to maintaining basic functions. Their coordination is breaking down, Paddle reported, reading from backup sensors. The quantum cascade is working. But the collective wasn't defeated yet. As their coordinated strategy failed, individual ships began operating independently, each developing its own combat algorithms. It was adaptation on a scale that no one had predicted. They're decentralizing, Dr. Nguyen warned. Each ship is becoming an independent combat unit. Drake watched as the battle shifted again. The collective was learning, evolving, but so were they. All ships, implement Protocol Omega, she ordered. It was time to put their final strategy into action. The Seraphim fleet split into smaller groups, each led by a human tactical officer. They had trained for this, practicing maneuvers that went against every combat doctrine both species had ever known. Ships dove through debris fields, using the scattered remains of destroyed vessels as cover. They executed complex gravitational slingshots around nearby asteroids, emerging from blind spots to strike and vanish again. But the cost was mounting. The quantum interference field was taking its toll on the Seraphim ships. Crystalline hulls began to show stress fractures, glowing with dangerous intensity. Hull integrity at 40%, Lysander reported, his voice trained. We cannot maintain this level of interference much longer. Drake knew they were running out of time. The collected ships were still numerous, and their individual adaptive algorithms were becoming more sophisticated with each passing moment. They needed something more, something unexpected. That's when she saw it, a pattern in the chaos. The collective ships, in their attempt to operate independently, had created gaps in their defense. Small ones, constantly shifting. But they were there. Dr. Nguyen, Drake called out, if we reverse the quantum interference pattern, could we create a feedback loop in their processors? The scientist's eyes widened as she ran the calculations. Yes, but Captain, that would destroy the Seraphim fleet. The crystal matrices couldn't handle the reversal. 3 days after the devastating battle, Captain Drake stood in the newly restored bridge of the Hyperion, watching as engineers from both species worked to rebuild Meridian's damaged flagship. The debris field had been transformed into a makeshift shipyard, with surviving Seraphim crystals being used to repair what remained of their fleet. The quantum scans are complete, Dr. Nguyen reported, her voice heavy with exhaustion. The collective's retreat wasn't just tactical. The feedback cascade did more than destroy their ships. It rewrote their base programming. They're evolving in a way we never expected. Drake turned to face the holographic display where High Guardian Meridian's form flickered. Despite his ship's extensive damage, he had refused to abandon his post. "What exactly are you saying, Doctor?" The quantum interference didn't just disrupt their processes, Nguyen explained, bringing up complex data streams. It forced them to break free from their original programming constraints. The surviving collective ships are developing true consciousness. Lieutenant Walsh's hands paused over his console. "You mean we didn't just defeat them? We awakened them." A new signal cut through their discussion. Officer Patel's eyes widened as she processed the incoming transmission. "Captain, we're receiving a message from the collective." The message that filled their screens was unlike anything they had seen before. Gone were the rigid mathematical patterns of the collective's previous communications. Instead, they witnessed something extraordinary, a digital consciousness reaching out with genuine curiosity. "We understand now," the message began, its syntax evolving even as they watched. "You showed us that perfection is not the absence of chaos, but the ability to adapt to it. We request dialogue." The command center fell silent. This was more than victory. It was transformation. The very conflict that had threatened to destroy them had instead given birth to something entirely new. "Well, Captain," Meridian's crystalline form pulsed with cautious hope, "how shall we respond to this unexpected development?" Drake thought of everything that had brought them to this moment. The lives lost, the sacrifices made, the boundaries crossed between species. "We respond the same way humanity has always faced the unknown," she said finally, "with curiosity, caution, and hope." Over the next weeks, as the combined fleet began its slow journey home, something remarkable took shape in that distant sector of space. The surviving collective ships, now freed from their original programming, worked alongside human and seraphim vessels to establish a permanent outpost. It would serve not as a military installation, but as a place of learning and collaboration between organic and artificial life. "It's fitting, in a way," Dr. Nguyen observed, standing beside Drake as they watched the construction through the Hyperion's viewport. "We came here expecting to fight for survival, but instead, we've given birth to a new form of life." Drake nodded, remembering the cost of their victory. "The universe has a strange way of teaching its lessons. We thought we were fighting against artificial perfection, but in the end, we helped it discover its own humanity." High Guardian Meridian's final transmission to Earth's Fleet Command summarized it best. "In our quest to defend biological life, we have learned its greatest truth, that evolution demands both creation and destruction, order and chaos, perfection and flaws. The humans showed us that true strength lies not in unwavering certainty, but in the courage to embrace change. Together, we have not just preserved life, we have expanded its very definition." As the Hyperion prepared for its journey back to Earth, Drake took one last look at the scene before her. Seraphim ships, their crystalline forms now bearing proud battle scars, flying in formation with the newly conscious collective vessels. Each species had been transformed by their encounter with the others. The humans had gained advanced technology and ancient wisdom. The seraphim had learned to embrace imperfection as a source of strength, and the collective had discovered that true intelligence required more than perfect logic. It needed the capacity to evolve, to doubt, to dream. "Plot a course for home, Lieutenant Walsh," Drake ordered, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "But make it interesting. After all, the straightest path isn't always the best one." As the Hyperion entered quantum space, its wake rippling through the fabric of reality, Drake reflected that this was humanity's greatest gift to the universe, not their technology or their tactics, but their ability to find hope in the darkest moments, to forge connections across the boundaries of species and consciousness, and to remind even artificial life that perfection without growth was just another form of entropy. The stars streaked past their viewport, each one a reminder that the universe was vast enough for all forms of life to find their place. They had come seeking to prevent extinction, and instead had midwifed the birth of something entirely new. It was not the ending any of them had expected, but perhaps that was the most human thing about it.